Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our deep dive series on the eDiscovery functions of Office 365. This is Tom O'Connor of the Gulf Coast Legal Technology Center here in recovery mode from Jazz Fest, New Orleans, Louisiana, along with Rachi Messing, of course, the Senior Program Manager at the Legal Department, should I call it, Rachi? Legal Division?
It's our internal legal department.
Internal legal department. Very good. Yep. So the senior program manager at the internal legal department at Microsoft. As I mentioned, this is the 5th installation. We've talked already about custodians and communication and holds and processing. Today we're going to start, I should say Rachi is going to start talking about search. But just to let you know, we're dividing that topic into 2 sections. So today will be, as I just so adroitly put it, phasers on 1, part 1 of the search discussion. Our next recording will be part 2, and Rocky's going to explain to us how he's broken that up, what the differentiation is. So Rachi, why don't I turn it over to you for search part 1.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at search, as Tom said, in 2 different ways. We're going to look at, first is kind of the high level culling search, where we go against the data that's sitting in the individual Office 365 workloads. So that might be data that's in Exchange, in OneDrive, in Teams, in SharePoint, wherever it might be. And talk about how we initially cull that data set down. So if you're, again, looking at it, comparing it to the EDRM process, you could kind of compare this to collections, because what we're doing is we're defining the set of data, not just the custodian, but getting a little bit more granular and saying, we want now this set of data either by date range, by the mailboxes, by the sites, even by keywords, potentially, because we can run all that in place. And we're going to talk about how we go ahead and do that. We'll talk about how we make sure that those searches or those gathering of those data sets are correct through some sampling techniques and other things like that. And then part 2 is going to be where we really do some deeper dive filtering on those searches. We also add in any non-Office 365 data that needs to be searched, and we go ahead and start looking at the actual data to potentially make some decisions, either from a review standpoint or just some additional culling that you can do on that data. And that's where we're also going to apply some of the analytics to the data and do some other cool things with it. So that's all going to be part of part 2. That makes sense? That breakout?
That sounds great. Thanks, Ron.
Okay, so let's go ahead in and talk about searching. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to start a new search. And for this search, we're going to say that if you remember in the last session, actually, we had established that there were a bunch of custodians. We had added some of their sites and some of their teams and their mailboxes and their OneDrives, put that all on hold. Let's go ahead and say that we wanted to just gather all of the data for those custodians. So what we would do is we would go in here, we would name the search, and because we would just want to gather all of their data, whatever they have, we're going to leave the keywords and the conditions empty. We'll come back to that in the next round of searches that we're going to do today. We're going to go ahead and select all of the custodians here, but you could obviously only select a handful of them if you wanted to. If I wanted to, again, I could select some non-custodial sources. I can also search against the entire Exchange or OneDrive or SharePoint environment. We'll get to that as well a little bit later. And I'm just going to go ahead, hit finish, and it'll kick off that search. Now, searches in general will take anywhere from usually about a minute to a couple minutes, depending on what the scope is. If I'm searching the entire environment, so for example, Microsoft internally, we've got about, I don't know, give or take 140,000 primary mailboxes in our Exchange environment, and a little bit over 1.1 million sites. We can search that entire environment in, usually it takes just under an hour to search all of that. So that's, you know, sounds like it could take a little while, but when you think about the scale of what we're searching, that's actually pretty quick. And it's live data that we're searching. So we'll get back to that in a couple minutes. Right now, so we went ahead and we set up that search just against custodians to pull all their data. And we'll look at those results shortly. Let's first do a couple more searches here.
Okay.
The next search that I'm going to do is I'm going to, again, against the custodians, but this time I'm going to run it with keywords. Okay. So, Tom, as you know, you want to talk a little bit about kind of the keyword development process and how that typically comes about?
Are you going to throw me under the bus?
I am. Hey, we got to make you work a little bit here.
The bane of our existence, and you're going to ask me to justify keyword searches.
In 30 seconds or less, please.
Okay, so it's easy in 30 seconds or less. And this is actually, I think, when it is most effective, and even some of the lesser known studies that have been done regarding keyword search show this. Get the most knowledgeable person you can on the case, who has worked with the data and understands not just what the data types are like, what you're looking at, but also the nuances of the case, the concepts and the precepts of the case, and have them develop your keyword searches. Now, I understand that's often difficult to do, especially early in the case. You may not have a whole lot of people who've done that, but there's got to be an attorney or attorneys who have worked on the case. The litigation did not spring like Minerva, full-blown from the forehead of Zeus. Somebody has been working on this matter for a while and looking at the issues and knowing the players, and has certainly been involved in putting together pleadings. It's often difficult to get that person or persons to agree to contribute to a keyword search, but I think it's essential. You need the most knowledgeable person. And then related to that, limit them. I think the biggest mistake that I see, and tell me if you've seen this too, Rocky, is you ask an attorney, this is the flip side of getting the most knowledgeable attorney. You ask the most knowledgeable attorney to give you keyword search terms, and he sends you back 250. Many of which are just slight iterations or alterations of each other. So at the onset, limit it to a reasonable number. I would say certainly under 25. And I don't think there's anything wrong with saying 10 or 12 just to get yourself going and start the process rolling. I don't know what you think about that, Rocky, but most knowledgeable person, limited number of query terms.
Yeah, and I would add a couple of things here. One is that typically the keyword searching process is usually an iterative process. So, right. You know, don't be afraid, especially when you have a tool like this, where you're going to be able to experiment and actually see what your results are and start seeing not just the numbers that return, but also the types of data that return for each of the search terms. So don't be afraid to experiment a bit on those. We do have searches, you know, probably our average case is probably somewhere under 25 terms, but we also have search terms in some cases that are a couple hundred. So you do need to actually, you know, look at what those terms are, and sometimes it's needed, and sometimes you're right. It's just an attorney who is trying to be as complete as possible because they know every aspect of it. A lot of times we'll go through those search terms and figure out, okay, you know, the attorney is asking us to search for the word Microsoft. You know, that's going to have a few hits.
You're going to get a couple of hits on that one, huh?
Yeah, exactly. So, you got to be careful in terms of really scrutinizing what those terms are and then looking at what those results are going to be. So let's take a look at how I would go ahead and do that in Office 365.
Okay.
So the first thing that I can do is I need to understand what the various syntax that I can use for creating keyword searches are. And I've got a link over here that brings me over to this document, which shows me that I've got all kinds of different operators that I can use on my searches. I can do things like saying keyword 1 and keyword 2, which will bring back only things where both 1 and 2 exist in the document somewhere. I can do things like using ORs. I can say where it's this word but not this other word. I can use proximity searches. So only where it's word 1 within 5 words of word 2. Or word 1 within 10 words of word 2, but not word 3. So I can really get some complex types of searches built out here, and using parentheses and wildcards to really be able to craft my search however I actually need it to be done. So for example, I could come in here and I could say something like Tom or Rachi. You'll notice that I went ahead and any of the operators that I'm going to use, I have to do them in all caps. That's very important because otherwise it'll consider it to be an actual keyword here, right? So if I did like that, I said Tom and Rachi, that's going to look for the word Tom, the word and the word Rachi.
Right.
So again, doing it in the right way and using the right syntax is really important here. The other thing that I can do is I can say show keyword list, which then allows me to do something like this, Tom, Rachi. And what that's going to allow me to do is it allows me to put in a list of keywords that now when I put in that list, it's going to actually run all of those words together as an OR search, right? Putting an OR between each one of the terms.
Yep.
But it'll also generate statistics for each individual line.
Yeah.
So I can see how many hits do I have on each of the individual terms. So I could also do something like Tom, mouse, and Rachi. And if I do this, that's the same thing as the one above, right? I can use the proximities. I can do whatever I need to do here in terms of actually crafting those searches. If I go ahead and I remove that checkbox, what you'll see is that it puts the searches in here with the C:(S) operator, which acts the same way as an OR, but it tells the system that it should generate statistics on each term in between those CS's. Okay?
Yeah.
So another thing that I can do is a lot of times you'll get a list of those terms from the attorney, or the attorney will generate that list. So I can just take that list, copy it, paste it in, and you'll see that it automatically pastes each of the individual terms that each one was on a separate line into this format with the C:(S). Okay?
Yep.
So now I can come in here again. I can say, this search is again our custodians keyword search. So I'm going to select all of the custodians. I'm going to say next. I'm not going to do any non-custodial sources for this search. I'll say finish, and it'll go ahead and create that search. Okay. Now let's go back, and we can see that our all data search for the custodians returned. Let me just show you. It says that it finished successfully. I can come in and I can take a look, and I can see that if I search for just all the data that these custodians have, I can see how many items they have, how many mailboxes, how many sites were searched, and I can do a preview, which lets me come in here And very quickly, it does a quick sample of the data just to pick out some of the items that hit on the search. I can come in and I can look at it in a native viewer. So for example, here, when I pick a PowerPoint file, it'll actually open PowerPoint Online, so I can see the actual file. I can't take any action on any of these files.
Okay.
So it doesn't let me, for example, go in and edit it. It doesn't let me, really do anything else besides just do a quick glance at the data and make sure that really the searches are kind of on target, that they're actually finding what we want them to find.
Right.
Now, the other thing that I can do here is I'm going to look at, I already had run this keyword search earlier, and I can look at the statistics on the search. And when I look at the statistics, I can see how many of the Exchange mailboxes and how many of the SharePoint sites actually hit, how much data actually hit within each of those locations. I can get a little bit more granular and say, okay, who actually had the data, right? Which is really helpful, especially in the beginning of a case when I'm trying to do custodial development and figure out who are the custodians here, right? I can go ahead and start looking and saying, wow, I didn't realize that Lynn was so active in whatever this is. And maybe I need to go in and look at the data that's hitting for Lynn to figure out, maybe one of the words happens to be part of her signature, or maybe it's a totally different project that she uses that same terminology on that's hitting, and I need to exclude that term specifically from her. So really getting a little bit more granular in terms of what's hitting and where, as well as understanding for each of the keywords that we ran, what actually hit on them.
Right.
So I can see that it does the overall search, right? All the terms combined, which had the 152 items returned. But then for each of the individual words, I can see what actually hit for each individual term. Right. Again, that's because we use the keyword list, the C:(S), in order to generate the statistics for each of those terms.
Okay.
All good?
Yep.
Okay, so now we've gone ahead, we've done a little bit of searching. The other thing that I can do here is on a search, I can actually create straight from the interface a quick, defensible, statistically sound sample. So I can come in here and I can either define my statistical levels that I want to use in terms of determining which documents are going to be randomly selected, or I can just simply say I want to randomly select 2%, totally random. Don't worry about having statistical validity, just pick 2% of the data set. And then I can take that and I can add it to a review set where I'll be able to take a deeper look at all of the data that hit on that sample.
Right.
Now, one thing that the product team is working on, I know, which is going to be very helpful, is also not just being able to sample against the documents that hit on my search, but also being able to sample the null set, which is basically looking at everything that didn't hit on my search, and they're going ahead and generating a sample, either a statistically sound sample or just a random sample, in order to see, okay, I ran these keywords, but what's not hitting on the keywords? What's the data that I'm missing? And is there anything responsive in there or relevant to my case that I really do want to make sure that I craft my searches in order to include that data as well?
Right.
So really important to the process is being able to do that type of sampling. So we've gone ahead, we've generated some searches, we looked at the statistics, we were able to take a quick glance look at some of the data, just a random set of the data. We're able to actually look at the sampling based off of statistics of the data. I can also run a search. Let's look at this search that we ran, where in this one, I did not select any keywords. I did not select any of the custodians, but instead what I did was I said select all. So search the entire tenant, my entire business, right? Entire company, search all of that data for whatever the search terms or non-search terms are. The other thing that I could have done here is I can use conditions to, for example, use some of the common data types to say, for example, show me everything that's within a specific date range, that's of a specific type, where specific participants are involved, or if you remember from the information governance session, we talked about applying labels. So if I've got labels, I can actually search things that hit on those specific labels. So with the date searches, I can say anything that's before or after certain dates, or in between two different dates. A quick search tip, because Office 365 is a global system, and a lot of companies which are multinational, they'll have all kinds of different time zones in effect in areas where the data is coming from. Right. We typically will actually, if we know that the date range is, for example, here, May 6th till April 6th to May 6th, we'll actually typically go a day before and a day after. So, for example, I'll go, instead of April 6th to May 6th, I'll go April 5th to May 7th to make sure that I'm capturing even data that has different date range, different time zones in there. I can go ahead and select some of my compliance labels that I had earlier. On the participants, I can go ahead and say, you can see it'll automatically pull, here's all of the participants within these email sets. So I can actually even use this to help me to understand who are these people talking to, right? Who are the participants within these communications? And then I could just go ahead and select a couple of them and say, these are the people I want to find anything where these people are involved in the conversations. Yep. And for certain data types, it'll actually give me a list of the different types of data that I can actually select. So if I just want to find things that are meetings, I can just search for meetings. If I want to find things that are just IMs, I can do that. So really getting pretty granular in terms of the types of searches that I'm doing. I can even do these same things and say a not search. So I can create, I could say where I don't want it to be a meeting. But if it's an email or anything else, then I do want to include it. So really getting granular in how we search is all possible here in Office 365. The last thing is that now that we've done these searches, and either we use keywords, we use date ranges, we use data types, or we just said, you know what, I want to grab all of the data for the custodians. The next step would be to go ahead and take that data, add the results to a review set, either an existing review set or a new review set, where I'm able to then take that data and in our next session, we're going to show all the different things that we can start doing some deeper searching and deeper analytics on the data that now exists within that review set. All good?
Yep.
Cool. So that is going to take us to the end of today in terms of just the core workload searching against the data as it exists in Exchange, SharePoint, wherever it might be. And looking forward to the next session where we'll dig in deeper on what we can do with all of that data. Excellent.
Rachi, thanks so much for your time. And like you, I'll look forward to our next session and a deeper dive into search technology. Thanks so much for being with us, and we'll see you in what will be episode 6, Search Part 2.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Rachi.